But welcome everybody, this is SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group, and this is the bi-weekly meeting. Today is September 13th. It is not Friday 13th, that is, well, not tomorrow, but tomorrow would be 14th. Anyway, today is Thursday. So in these calls, it's unbelievable. So it's on the same minute as we start talking, we lose this. Okay, so what I was about to say. So Patrick typically leads these calls on bi-weekly, the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript development calls, but he's on a family leave. Unfortunately, he was actually heading to the family leave exactly on the location which has been now evacuated in the east coast of US. So he's back home, but having hopefully a relaxed week without actually doing anything that special. Hopefully things go well on the East Coast, but it looks kind of terrifying, at least for now. And those people, hopefully, if you are located in the East Coast in those areas, hopefully you've moved from the location. But nevertheless, let's concentrate on SharePoint. Now, on these calls, what the SharePoint Framework and JavaScript Special Interest Group is all about, this is really around concentrating on the SharePoint Framework, what's happening there, also on the client side in development in general. So if you're developing, for example, using Node.js, or you're doing JavaScript injection or user custom actions, even in classic and on-premises scenarios, that actually falls on this call. Technically, SharePoint Framework is really the man or the model in future also for on-premises, but obviously we do welcome any other topics in this call as well. There's two URLs there. There's the AKMS SPFx community that redirects to the SharePoint tech community sites where people can ask questions, and then the other one is the AKMS SP Dev Docs, which is the official document location. So, which is where you can actually find all of the related documents on SharePoint development. Now, on the agenda of this week, so we will do a quick update on the engineering update. So obviously this is on the same week as the monthly community call. So in the monthly community call, we had 165 attendees. So it's as expected this to be a slightly lower than 165 or 160, but typically that's absolutely understandable. 2 calls in 1 week for SharePoint Dev is quite a lot. Obviously all of the calls are getting recorded, so this you can always jump to the specific demos if you don't want to see me babbling on this call. So you can actually just check the recordings and jump to the demos if you don't want to see the update on the engineering side. Now, today we have 2 cool demos after an update on the open source project. So Luis Manez from Clear People, if I remember correctly. Yes, it is Clear People. Showing an app customizer using text analytics API from page comments. So analyzing incoming page comments and then showing the rating of the page based on that. And that's actually pretty cool because it shows how you can combine SharePoint Framework App Customizer, which doesn't have to be visible. In this case, if I remember correctly, it has a small header placeholder, and then using Azure Functions and Azure Services to extend the capabilities within a SharePoint. And that's really the power of the SharePoint Framework and the application customizer as an example. So you can, in a reliable way, using the governance model with an application catalogs and all of that, to utilize Azure, for example, in every single site of your SharePoint Online tenant. So it brings humongous amount of opportunities. Paolo will join slightly late today, probably hasn't joined yet. He has a customer engagement, but he'll be joining 1/2 latest. And he'll be showing what does it mean to call Graph APIs or Web APIs. Well, in this case, Graph APIs using the SharePoint Framework version 1.6. So talk about the process of what does it mean if you need to get access on the Graph APIs on behalf of the users, how do you approve the permissions and all of that. Obviously, the situation hasn't dramatically changed since the preview of the calling a graph for the GA, but there are certain small adjustments, but we'll walk through the process and we can talk about what it means in practice. It might be that Paolo is actually on the call already. Let me scroll down and I'll promote him as a presenter if that is the case. And he is not here. Okay. Oh, he is. Maybe Bert actually already promoted him and say, yes, he did. And that was faster than I thought, than thinking. Okay, cool. So let's actually move on. Before we go to the SharePoint Framework engineering update, quick kind of a slide on opportunities of participating on this call. So if you are building something, you have a sample, you have even a product or a capability which you want to demonstrate in this call, that's actually more than welcome. So really the main purpose of these calls is to show what's possible using the SharePoint developer platform, in these calls especially concentrating on SharePoint framework solutions. The most preferred way would be showing a sample which is then getting contributed in the open source sample GitHub repos. But obviously if there's an interesting story around some solution which you can't share as an open source, that's an interesting option as well. And please reach out to me, Bert, Patrick, or anybody in the PnP core team to agree then on which week you would actually do the demonstration. Now you can obviously also demo other JavaScript-driven development in these calls, like anything from a PnP repository, PnP organization, and let's talk about that, and that's evolving as well slightly later today. You can contribute in a GitHub, so providing issues, providing pull requests, for example, for documents and all of that. So having a comment in the document, SharePoint dev document, which is saying, oh, by the way, this entry in this document should be as following, is valuable. But actually, there is an edit button in every single SharePoint dev document and article. You can click the edit button. If you have a GitHub account, you can just add that modification what you want and submit a pull request. It takes seriously 1 minute to do that. So it is super fast way to do that. But again, if nothing else, please add a comment and say that we need to fix something, so we get that one recorded in our backlog. And really key is to provide the feedback as well. So making sure that we in SharePoint engineering, up to the level of Jeff Deeper, who owns everything underneath Office, is really interested on your feedback. If something doesn't work, we mess up something, we need to fix something, please keep on that feedback coming. Don't complain that Microsoft doesn't listen behind of somewhere else, but make sure, or actually you can do that as well, as long as you remember also tell us. And sooner or later we'll most likely resolve your issue. Or go to the issue list in the GitHub and report an issue, and sooner or later we will actually act on that as fast as possible. So super important. Please keep the feedback coming. Now, a quick update on SharePoint Framework. Few updates on this one. I think I have an updated usage at least in here. A few kind of a generic things: AKMS, SP DevDocs, developer documentation. All of the tutorials in here have been refreshed for 1.6, so the getting started tutorials. So if you're looking into videos and written formats on, okay, how would I get started on SharePoint Framework development, there is a free, easily accessible tutorials in here as well. Obviously, there are great third-party training materials on the SharePoint Framework development as well. But if you don't mind hearing Finglish in these videos, which are available in the docs.microsoft.com, you can actually learn the getting started on SharePoint Framework as well. Finglish means a connection between it's the Finnish and English at the same time. And right now you're hearing Finglish. Now the next slide, quickly running into issues. So we're trying to catch up on all of the issues which are coming in the SPDev docs issue list. And this is really for you to report anything related on development. We are falling slightly behind on this, but we actually have now an external support team, well, not an internal support team, but it's not part of the engineering. It is our support team which will start helping us on here. And for example, later today we will have 1.5 hours or 2 hours already booked on going through the GitHub issues. So we're really targeting to catch up these by Ignite, and then after Ignite we should be able to keep up to date on what's coming in. We kind of during summertime we're unable to follow up on all of the things which were coming in. So, that's a horrifying message on the Iron window. Don't scare me. What about SharePoint Framework? So how's adoption for third-party solutions? Now, this is there just to show you if you're kind of considering that, well, Microsoft keeps on telling that SharePoint Framework is highly used, but I don't know, I want to keep on doing farm solutions. Well, you can. Farm solutions are supported in on-premises, but the more preferred option, if you want to align on the future of SharePoint development, is actually your SharePoint framework. And the usage is skyrocketing. We are bypassing every single other customization model and supported even API model in Office 365. So SharePoint framework is by far the most widely used customization model in Office 365. As an example, we grew adoption of SharePoint framework 240% from January 2018. So we went GA with SharePoint framework on February 2017. Even during this year, we grew 240% from an adoption perspective. And it actually keeps on skyrocketing even more. So you can see how the charts are going faster and faster up on the hill, which is interesting, but obviously it's a good thing. And in the upcoming Ignite, we'll demonstrate pretty soon after Ignite, we'll actually release that, the unified development model together with Microsoft Teams. So you're able to actually use SharePoint framework when you are creating a Microsoft Teams tabs. So you have a unified way of building JavaScript-based customizations. It doesn't matter if it's in SharePoint, if it's in Microsoft Teams, and in the future for other products, you will use the same tooling. So which is a great story. You learn one way of doing stuff, it actually works everywhere in Office 365. Well, hopefully everywhere in Office 365 sooner or later. Right now, it's SharePoint and the Teams starting pretty soon. Now, 1.6 went live last week, so that has happened since the last 2 weeks ago. And 1.6 is really the native Microsoft Graph Access, which we're going to see today from Paolo. Securely accessed third-party web APIs hosted in Azure. That's a really big thing because you can now securely call, for example, an LOB hosted in on-premises using Azure. And that's really cool. So you can have a web part which is surfacing data from your, let's say, ordering or CRM system securely hosted in the SharePoint Online. Securely meaning that it's able to call the web API hosted in Azure in a secured way and then surface the data using SharePoint framework in the UIs of the SharePoint Online. And that's really, really cool. The second big thing was our third big thing was the tenant-wide deployment of extensions. We did a cool demo on this one in the monthly community call. Recording is out for that one, but that's a really, really powerful functionality as well. AKMS SPFx is really the location to get more details and getting started. Now, one thing what happens actually earlier today, like 30 minutes before this session, we finally got the blog post out, and this is now out. So introducing open source PnP SPFx Yeoman generator, and this is a big thing for us as well. So what we want to do is that because you can't, or the out-of-the-box, because of the out-of-the-box Yeoman generator is not open source, at least yet, we wanted to provide a way for the communities to start expanding the out-of-the-box capabilities which are provided from the Yeoman templates. And this is what we're doing with this one. So this is now a PnP SPFx Yeoman generator which extends the out-of-the-box Yeoman generator. So basically, when you install this one, you will get this one plus the out-of-the-box one. And what it means is that when you run the generator, it will ask, hey, what kind of JavaScript do you want to use? Do you want to use handlebars, which is right now the new one as an example, or do you want to use any of the out-of-the-box ones which are available from the out-of-the-box templates, which is React.js, Knockout, and No Framework. And it's really easy to get started. It's packaged, it's available from npm or yarn or npmm to get installed. Well, you can install that. It's available from npm anyway. And right now the project doesn't have a massive amount of contributors because we've been working together with Stefan Bauer, who's the lead on this one, and Chris Kent has contributed already on this one. But then we're looking into expanding that team significantly in the future for those who want to actually work on the Yeoman templates side of the story. So we're able to then add additional frameworks like Vue.js with Alex, who's been working on Vue.js Yeoman templates. Hopefully we'll get that one merged here, and a few other frameworks like Ember and potentially even Angular Elements, even though that has a slightly more complex story, which we are still working together with Andrew Connell as an example on making that happen. But really cool. This is a start, and we'll see how far we get with this one. It gives us the capability of extending the Yeoman templates and extending what's available when you scaffold a solution. And your feedback absolutely welcome on this one. And by the way, thank you, David, for pasting in the blog post, release blog post on that one. Now, moving on things. This slide I showed already on Tuesday, so this is just a quick update on the SharePoint framework and SharePoint work. So Ignite is within 1.5 weeks. We'll announce additional stuff on, how would I put it, non-SharePoint framework areas in Ignite. So there will be like new stuff related on theming, new stuff related on site design, site scripts. We'll talk about additional placeholders. We'll talk about additional things which is coming up in the SharePoint in the Ignite timeframe. Now, in SharePoint framework, we've been pretty open what's happening and where. So we are releasing the 1.6 went already live last week, which is kind of targeted for Ignite timeframe, and then 1.7 we will demonstrate already in Ignite, but it will go live during October. So most likely it's the late October, and we're crossing fingers that, well, the objective is really to push it out in late October, not in November, because especially in US, when it goes to the November timeframe, it's already in quotes the holiday season, and that slows down everything what's happening there. Do the holiday season model in the US, so which are slightly different. Now, and obviously SharePoint framework is in the SharePoint 2019, and that's going to be 1.4. How would I put it? 0/1.4.1. So it's going to be 1.4.0, except you can run npm 5 and Node 8 for the development. And that's going to be then released to GA later this year, because as part of SharePoint 2019, when that goes to RTM. RTM meaning that it's available for you in production usage. Now, is there a plans to improve the build tasks, Webpack 4? Discussions are ongoing. Most likely that will be in the 1.7. We have a dependencies on Office UI Fabric. Office UI Fabric is already using Webpack 4 in certain areas, so we need to, in SharePoint framework, we need to get there as well. Now, what will be the timing and everything else, I can't promise that to be in 1.7. Most likely it is there, but it's not confirmed. So let's put it this way. And obviously, whatever you see now on the list of 1.7, that can still change. That this is our objective. But if the timelines are right now more important for us than the actual features. So we want to ship this in October, and then we'll drop the features which are not ready. Now, moving on to the PnP JS. So Patrick kindly updated this slide for the PnP JS stuff. So PnP JS is there really for easily execute or use the native SharePoint REST APIs with a fluent wrapper. So you don't have to remember the REST API. You can do pnp.web.list.getList, even though you're writing a JavaScript implementation. And 1.2.1 was released on September 5th. So that's a week ago, or roughly a week ago. And there has been a lot of improvements on the code base. There's a new documentation formatting. So there's a new documentation platform. So we basically we aligned our documentation platform in the PnP because the PnP JS was using a slightly different model. So everything is now aligned with a similar process. There has been a lot of feedback and ideas and pull requests and activities in here. So thank you everybody for your input around this one. pnp.github.io/pnpjs is the URL where you can see the latest and the new documentation side of the story. SPFx client patch is still in beta as of 1.6. I think it should be. That's interesting. We probably need to double check that one. It most likely will be GA in 1.7. Yes. I'll need to come back on that one. Office 365 CLI. Quickly on the Troy's question, we do have tutorials for using Graph in SPFx 1.6. So Paolo is going to do demos today. So there's a tutorials obviously in the official documentation, so you can easily actually follow up on those. And the tutorials, I can't remember if they are videos or not. And whoever forgot to mute, please mute, please mute, please mute. There we go. There's one, and there's another one. Just removing the background noise. Still somebody is here causing some noise. Here we go. Cool. On Office 365 CL side of the story, give me 1 second. Just adding some notes to myself. There we go. So on the CLS side, nothing humongous happening within the last 2 weeks. So the things are progressing. There's new beta versions available. Waldek basically said for me, well, there hasn't been humongous amount of activities right now. Well, development is moving, but they're in beta side of the story. So there's new support, for example, for easier and better upgrading of your solution. And we had a earlier meeting today with me, Waldek, and Mikael Svensson. And we were chatting there with Mikael, and Mikael also said that, well, the only reason he's using a CLI, because Mikael is a PowerShell guy, is that he's using the CLI actually to help migrating his solutions from previous versions to SharePoint Framework 1.6. So that's one of the really killer applications and killer features in Office 365 CLI, which you can easily install, and then you're able to go to the command line documentation, and you can actually see how do you run the analysis of upgrading tooling, and that will then give you the insights on how to upgrade from SPFx projects between that should have been updated. It is actually supporting already to 1.6 version. Now, moving on SPFx reusable components. Ilya couldn't make this call either, unless I'm completely mistaken, but there's new versions of both the property controls for projects, which will help you to build a cool web part properties and really have a look on these. These will reduce the costs and the development time what is needed by you. And there's React content controls like the title, web part title, and the placeholder controls, which you can take advantage. Most used control by far is the placeholder control, which is used super widely by the community and customers. Some recent highlights: improved accessibility, reusable columns in list view control, taxonomy picker improvements, and control polishing in general based on incoming feedback. Now, after Ignite, we are going to do another round of, let's say, hunting down reusable controls from the out-of-the-box side of the world. So we use this project also to introduce controls which are originally out-of-the-box controls in first-party web parts, so web parts were implemented by Microsoft. But because of those web parts are not open source, we basically get the controls out of the first-party web parts and push them out using this particular project. So probably want to have a look on this. This will help your time a lot and will reduce the time and development costs for your solutions. Now, finally time for the demos. Me talking quite a lot, but we still have more than 30 minutes. That should be enough, and then we should have even time for Q&A. Luis, we test your audio already. I think we are ready to go with a really cool application customizer.
Hi guys, thank you very much, Vesa, for the introduction. I'm gonna share my screen, so please, if you can let me know when you can see it, please.
Yep. Not yet.
Loading.
Loading, 3 dots.
Should be now.
And I got it at least. Yep, got it.
Okay, cool. So, well, hi everyone. As Vesa has already explained, what I'm going to show you in this demo is how we can use the text analytics API in the cognitive services from an application customizer in SPFx, so that we can analyze sentiments from comments in a page. So let's actually first take a look on a live demo. So here there's a model page with a couple of comments. I'm serving locally the solution. So if I refresh the page, load debug, and as you can see here in the top right hand side, there's some kind of rating with 2.5 stars here, and this is coming from analyzing this couple of comments in the page using the Text Analytics API. So in this case, as you can see, we have a very positive comment and also a very bad one. So, well, we are half happy with the page. Let's see that we remove the bad one, because actually it never rains in Seattle. So let's remove it. And if we refresh the page again, we should be quite happy with the page. Yeah, here we go, 5-star. And well, obviously if you have no comments in the page, then the custom header is not gonna be in place. You can see here. Okay, cool. So now let's see how we can use the Test Analytics API with first a very quick introduction to the community service, which I really love them. This is the artificial intelligence services from Microsoft and are already pre-trained and quite easy to consume. So we have different categories. We can do things with image processing. There's another sample from me about using the Vision API as well. You can analyze speech, search, and in this case, the Test Analytics API is in the language category. Test Analytics. You can test it from here. So you can enter test and you can see all the things that you can do with the Test Analytics, the sentiment, that is the one that I'm using in the sample, but also extract key phrases, which is really good for tagging systems and so on, language, analyze, this kind of cool things. And also we have an API section on here. So if we go to the sentiment option, we can test the API directly from here if we select the proper location. And we need the API key. So we are going to get this key from the Azure portal. So let me jump into the portal. And on here, if we create a new resource and we search for Test Analytics, that one, create. And on here you select name, subscription, and pricing tier. And also the location is quite important, because if you register the service in a specific location, the endpoint URL is going to be for that specific location. So if you try to call it, if you register in West US and you call it later using the North Europe API, even with your key, that's gonna fail. I'm gonna cancel this because I already have a service already registered. So if we jump into it, Test Analytics API Lab, and as you can see here in the overview, we have the endpoint with the specific location that I register the service. And if we jump into the keys, we can grab the key. And then we can use it directly from the portal. And let's take a look to how the request body should be. This is the URL, so we are pointing to the sentiment endpoint. And in the request, we need to send an array of different documents, and each document contains a language, the text that you want to analyze, and an ID that should be unique in this collection of documents. And if we send, we can get the response and see how the response looks like. And we have the same array of documents. The ID matches with the ID that you've sent, because now it's in order, but it should be completely unordered. So you have to use the ID to match the specific test that you analyze. And you have a score. This is just a number between 0 and 1. 1 is very positive, 0 very bad comment. So this is the response. And also keep in mind that there are some limits in order to consume the API. These are completely documented on this table. So only 1 megabyte in the entire request, 100 calls per minute as maximum. And also in this text, we can't have more than 5,000 characters. And also you can't send more than 1,000 documents in the same request. So there are things that we have to keep in mind. Okay, so now let's actually dig into the code. So here, what we have is an application customizer, SPFx project. So as here we have the main class, the entry point. So we are extending the base application customizer, and then when on init we are rendering the placeholders. So we are creating or ensure if it's already created that we have the placeholder top. So this is obviously the header. And then we are just injecting a specific React component when the placeholder is already available. The component is a React component, page sentiment header, and we are passing the context and the text analytics API key. This is coming from the properties of the extension. So when you register when you deploy the solution, you can set the properties, and if you are running locally, you can use the serve.json file and configure it on here. So if we jump into the page sentiment header component, as you can see, first we have the base main URL for the endpoint, in this case with the West US location where I register the service. When the component is about to mount, I'm just setting some variables just to have a shortcut to some of the context variables. And in the component did mount, we are checking if the page is a content page, just to avoid the component to work in management pages or all items pages and so on. Here we are just, I'm just checking if we have a specific list ID and list item ID. And if so, then we need to get the comments of the page. So to do that, we have a function on here, get top 3 page comments, and just getting top 3 comments for this sample. So we can use the SharePoint REST API, getting the specific page and the comments endpoint, using the SPHTTP client to do the request, and then I'm just mapping the result to a specific class iPage comment with just ID, author, comment, and created date. Actually, we just need the ID and the comment, so I'm mapping on here. After that, I'm calling in this getSentiment from page comments function, sending the different comments from the previous query. And here we are calling the sentiment endpoint. We are using the HTTP client, and in this case we need first to prepare the body of the request and the headers, as we've seen in the website. So we have here a function to prepare the different headers, content type JSON, and the specific API key from the properties of the extension. And then we are preparing the body object on here with the different documents with the ID and the text that we want to show. So we are returning the HTTP client options that we are using on here to post the request to the sentiment endpoint, get the response. If we just have one score from one comment, this is the one that we are using. Otherwise, in this with the reduce function, I'm just doing a sum up of the different score from the different comments, and in this function on here, just getting the average of all these comments to have just a number between 1 and 5 in order to render the rating with the 5-star icon component. So if we take a look to the render method, a couple of checks to ensure that we have content, and if so, we get the score, number between 1 and 5 again, and just using this rating component from the Office Fabric UIs, which is really easy to use. So we use the large size, we send the rating value from the sentiment API and all this sum up and average and so on, and just read only, because obviously we are getting the values from the API and the user is not able to change any value. And finally, this is shown in the page as we've seen in the live demo. I think there's nothing else from my side that I want to show you in case you have any question. just
can you Lewis go back on the page still and one more time show the functionality just now that we went through the code and just that we get it properly covered?
Yeah. What you want to do, Besa, sorry?
So just to demonstrate it one more time, so it doesn't have to be covered, just to refresh how it looked after looking into the code.
Okay, let me add another comment. So when we refresh the page, we are getting sentiment analysis from this specific comment and just rendering this 5-star icon, rating icon.
Now, this is super cool solution. I'm just pinpointing the small flaw on this thinking, which is why would a comment reduce the rating of an article? No, just kidding. Just never mind. Never mind. Anyway, just being sarcastic or and a stupid joke, but really cool demo and really great usage of Azure as well. And this actually shows how simple it is actually used to those Azure services. And in Microsoft or in the native side of the SharePoint engineering and OneDrive, I think there was already some announcements that we're planning to use automatic metadata tagging and all of that based on image analysis in Azure, and all of that is coming actually in the OneDrive and in SharePoint side. So we're looking into also taking advantage of these similar services, but really great demo on showing how simple it is to use. Cool. Thank you, David, also for pasting in the sample URL that was in the sample URL there. Super important question from Giuliano Luca. Will you be in SharePoint Saturday Barcelona, please? Yeah, sure. I'll be there. Cool.
You are invited, by the way, Besa.
I know, but I can't. So I would love to visit more of these things, but it's just horrible, the balance between a work and a life and a Redmond and everything else and family and family number one priority. Cool. Paolo, I think it's time to flip to your screen.
Okay, let me switch to my screen. Welcome everybody in the meantime. And please, as usual, let me know when you will see my screen.
While we're waiting for that one, will you be in the SharePoint Saturday Barcelona?
I will not. I will be in SharePoint Saturday Milan, and you will be there. So
precisely. just to advertise these things, it's SharePoint Saturday Milan. That was in October, right?
The 6th of October. Yeah.
Yeah. There we go. Cool. We can, Paolo, see your screen. I think we're good to go.
Great, thank you. So let's now talk about how we can consume the Microsoft Graph from within the SharePoint framework using the SharePoint Framework 1.6. And so it will be kind of a recap of what you can do targeting the Microsoft Graph using the latest NGA bit that we have, because we already covered this topic in the past, but we were using the preview version of the SharePoint framework and of the Graph client. Now we have the final release, and so we need to see what has been changed and what we can do to be fully able to consume the Microsoft Graph. So this is a really simple client-side web part which can be used to search a list of users in Azure Active Directory using the Microsoft Graph. So I can search for myself because I feel lost, and here is my user, or I can search for Vesa and any other user that I could have in my testing tenant. And under the cover, this web API is using the Microsoft Graph to search for them in Azure AD. And I'm using the list users API endpoint that we have in Microsoft Graph, which, for the sake of clarity, requests the delegated permission to read basic user all or user read all, and or any of these permissions if we want to use a delegated token. And will simply require us to make a request, a GET request targeting the users endpoint of the Microsoft Graph v1.0, eventually providing any filtering or any selection request in the REST URL. From a SharePoint framework perspective, using SharePoint Framework 1.6, here I have the source code of my client-side web part, which is based on a React component. So the client-side web part by itself is really simple and easy, and I simply create a new instance of a React component, providing as one of the input parameters for that component the context of the client-side web part in which I am. So this is the context, the base client-side web part context that I provide to the target component. On the other side, this is the React component that I have. First of all, I need to import a reference to the MS Graph client type, which is now available in the @Microsoft/sp-http library, and I have to use this name instead of the old one we were used to using during the preview edition of the MS Graph client. And for the sake of having a kind of a decent UI, I decided to use a detailed list with a list of items inside of it, and that's why I need to define the outline of my columns, but doesn't really matter from a graph consumption perspective. And here we are in the search users React component. There I have a search users method where I simply create a new instance of the MS Graph client type. And in order to do that, with the 1.6 released version of SharePoint Framework, we simply need to ask to the context of the client-side web part or of any client-side extension that we are developing to create a new instance of the client through a factory object. In fact, we have an MS Graph client factory property of the context through which we can invoke the getClient method, which is, as you can see, an asynchronous method. And here I'm using the async await pattern because I come from the C# side of the world and I love async await. And I get asynchronously a client instance, which will be an MS Graph client instance, and I will simply need to use the Fluent API of the Graph SDK in the TypeScript code of my client-side web part in order to invoke the users API to select a specific set of properties for my target query, eventually to filter the item based on the input provided by the user in the search box, or maybe not if I don't have any text to search for, and then I simply make a GET request for that specific Microsoft Graph endpoint. Again, the GET method is an asynchronous one, so I still use the async await pattern, and I will get back a JSON response, which will be an object made of a value property, which will be the real array of items that I'm interested in. And that's why once I have this object, I get the value property and I simply use it as an array of items that I bind to the UI using React in order to do the data binding in the UI. And then, of course, I do the rendering of my client-side web part and of the list of resulting items, if any. But in order to make it possible for this client-side web part to work and to consume the Microsoft Graph, I need to be compliant with the requirements of the, for example, of the list users action. And one of the requirements is to have any of these permissions, delegated permissions, in order to consume the API. And that's why whenever we use the SharePoint framework to consume the Microsoft Graph or any other API registered in Azure AD, we need to declare in the package.json package solution JSON file of our solution, we need to declare what are the web API permission requests for our solution. So at the solution level, not at the web part or extension level, but at the whole solution level, we declare an array of permission requests that we need to see satisfied, granted to our solution in order to being able to run, and in my scenario, to consume the Microsoft Graph. And that's why here I declare that from a web API permission request, the resource Microsoft Graph has to have the user.read.all permission scope granted. But this information will be used by SharePoint and by the infrastructure of SharePoint Framework in order to allow an administrator of my SharePoint tenant to grant this permission to SharePoint Framework. Let me show you how. In the browser, I also have the app catalog site, which is under the cover of my current tenant. And here in the apps for SharePoint, I already have my solution. Let me just update the solution. Let me drag it again onto the folder. Once you add a solution to the app catalog, if it is the first time, you will have to deploy the solution. If it is just an update like I did right now, it will just override the item. But once you do that, if you go to the new admin center of SharePoint Online, and you select the API management page, there you will see any of the Web API permission requests pending in the list of pending approval items. And as you can see here, I have the pending approval item for the user.read.all permission request targeting the Micrograph resource, which is exactly the one I had in my package solution JSON file. Of course, as an admin, you can approve or reject such permission requests. And if you approve those permission requests, every single SharePoint framework component, so not only the client-side web part or the extensions that you included in your solution, but the whole set of client-side components built using SharePoint framework will be granted that permission. In fact, under the cover, in the Azure AD tenant of your target Office 365 tenant, if you go under portal.azure.com and if you select Azure Active Directory, in the Enterprise Application section, you can search for a specific service application, which is called, with a very long name, SharePoint Online Client Extensibility Web Application. I think it's the longest name ever. Just kidding.
We changed the application when we went to the GA, which is, by the way, the reason if you have a preview graph web parts, you will need to re-grant the permissions because the application name has been changed. Exactly. And while you're doing that, sorry for jumping on this, there was an awesome question which Bill already answers from Raymond, I think it was, related on is this scopes for the whole tenant or is it only for a solution? And you actually, Paolo, answered that already. It is for the whole tenant. So every single SharePoint Framework solution will get the same permissions. Now, somebody might be saying, well, that's wrong. Why can't you scope for an individual SharePoint Framework solution level? And the answer is actually that we in SharePoint Engineering, we need to piggyback on capabilities which are available in Azure AD. And unfortunately, Azure AD does not give us a smaller scopes to grant permission. So you cannot actually grant a permission for an individual smaller application. We can't also create new applications in the Azure AD of the customer dynamically because that wouldn't scale. So that would have massive issues as well. So that's why we actually have this one application which we then actually manage the permissions. So that's just to quickly explain how we ended up on this design.
Exactly. And just to be sure that you don't use the wrong one, there should be also a SharePoint Online Client Extensibility, which is the old one used under the preview time frame. Please ignore that one right now. You need to search for the SharePoint Online Client Extensibility web application. Actually, you don't need to go there on a daily basis. It's just to show you how it works. But once we will see now how it works, I think you can simply ignore the existence of this service application. But inside this service application, under the permissions, we can see that this application has precisely the permissions that I requested. So from a Micrograph perspective, the permission to read all user profiles, plus the permission to sign in users, which is needed to make it possible to authenticate the currently connected user and get back an access token for that user. I'm saying that because under the cover, whenever I search for something in my really simple client-side web part, what happens under the cover is that the SharePoint Framework infrastructure using ADIL.js, so Active Directory Authentication Library for JavaScript, retrieves an open authorization token from Azure AD, and that token which will be stored in the session storage of the current user, will simply store the information, the access token and the information, to make it possible for my client-side solution to consume the target API in the Microsoft Graph. And here, for example, you can see, of course, it is not very clear to be seen, but you can unpack it and decode it and see that it will be an open authorization access token, which will exactly define that we have, or we can even do that if you want to be really if you want to go deep on stuff, we can go to jot.io, and we can see that inside that jot or JWT token, we precisely have the access token for the web application principal we saw before, with exactly the permission we saw in Azure AD for my current user in order to consume the Microsoft Graph, which is my target resource. And because of this access token, which is stored in the session storage, my client-side web part is able to consume the graph. If I want to consume any other API provided by the Microsoft Graph, let's say that I want to use not only the API for consuming the users, but the groups or whatever else, well, I will simply need, or let's say the calendar, because I have it here. If I want to list the events in the calendar, well, I will need to see what are the permissions requested for this operation. I will have to declare in the package solution JSON file the permission request. I will have to grant, or at least an admin will have to grant that permission to the app principal of the SharePoint framework, and that's it. We can simply use the Graph API, creating the instance of the Graph client using the factory and consuming the Graph using the Fluent API. So pretty straightforward now that you know what is the full round trip, but really, really powerful in order to create real business solutions, at least in my opinion.
Sure.
And that's it for me as well, Visam. So
a few things. Can we go back on the tenant admin UI? You pinpointed the one bug in here, which was really nicely done. Thank you, Paolo.
Welcome.
So, yes.
Yes,
so obviously, because we already granted the user read all permission, it does not make any sense to request the same permission again. So that would mean that we should not see the user read all in this admin UI. Now we're working on in the engineering, and our engineers are looking into polishing this UI. So please keep on reporting issues. This is kind of an inconvenient, obviously, but the problem here is that if you now reject that request, well, actually it doesn't get rid of the approved status. It doesn't remove the approved permission because that pending approval is the request, and if you deny the request, it doesn't touch the approved permissions. Some other things just to pinpoint here. We had a quite often you saw a pop-up back in the preview time frame. The pop-up, in theory, there might be some really rare edge cases where you might run into the pop-up requirement still. By default, that is gone. The reason why the pop-up was there, for those who've been testing that, is that we are using adult.js under the covers, and adult.js is actually based on the pop-up model. We're not using MSAL because MSAL is not GA, so we can't use it because this is in production functionality. So even though Azure AD guys are saying MSAL can be used in production, but it's still in preview and it's in beta, and they can basically change the API still, and that would then break SharePoint Online, and we can't make that dependency. Then there was a question related on, hey, so creating dynamically the application in Azure AD, what do you mean it doesn't scale? Can we go back on the permissions and content? So we had a long design discussions with Azure AD people. I wasn't actually the person running that. That was a Luca Pandinelli, who has a session also in Ignite. But the conclusion was that the way we actually add solutions and components in SharePoint, which can happen rapidly per tenant, and a one SharePoint farm can actually have tens of thousands of tenants. So you might actually end up having tens of thousands of applications potentially created in a really short time frame, and Azure AD doesn't necessarily scale for that amount of operations which would be pending. So the decision was actually to make this based on a single application in here, which is provisioned to all of the tenants automatically. So But this is basically the reasoning behind why we don't dynamically create the application. Sure, somebody might say, well, that's not my problem, that's Microsoft's problem, and you should make it work, which is, yeah, potentially that might where we're heading in the future, but it was better to release this functionality now with the current capability until the Azure AD can scale for the SharePoint requirements potentially in the future. So it's just, again, timing and resources and everything else, which has surprisingly big impact even in Microsoft. Did I miss any of the... Is AAD HTTP client still in preview? No, that is actually out as well. So calling a third-party web APIs is GA as well. So as part of the 1.6 Graph APIs and Azure AD AAD client is also out. So you can actually get that one, and that is available as well.
And there is another factory for that one, the HTTP client factory rather than the MS Graph client factory, but almost the same approach.
So technically, it's exactly the same approach. You can actually use Azure AD HTTP client factory to call Graph APIs because underlying the technology is exactly the same. If you use Microsoft Graph client, a Microsoft Graph HTTP client model, then you're using the Fluent API to get access on the Graph scopes and functionalities. If you just want to hit the REST API, you could use Azure AD HTTP client to get access on that one. But that's super powerful because you can then have your custom web API or Azure functions secured by your enterprise identities and only secured for your enterprise, and you can call that securely. So super cool stuff.
And that's a demo that we have in the starter kit.
That's a demo which I have in the starter kit. Oh, that's actually a good point. So on the
line of business. Yep.
Just to update this one, can you actually, Paolo, still open this one URL in your window, and then we can close up the call as well. So this is the starter kit location. We are, well, actually Waldek was the lucky one who got assigned upgrade to 1.6 on this one. We will actually release, in quotes, a starter kit version 2.0 in the Ignite, which is, to be fair, it's not as significant upgrade as the original starter kit. The 2.0 is more on upgrading on SharePoint Framework 1.6, support the functionalities in the all of the tenants, and then we do a facelift on the images and some of the content based on our design organization's requests, and that's then the refresh. You will see refreshes coming up on this one, but really the power of this one is, if you scroll down, Paula, there is a list of all of the web parts, and I think there's roughly around 9 different web parts. For example, my email, my calendar, my tasks, my meetings web parts, all of those web parts which are available here as well. So, and you can easily start using them, and the implementation is actually pretty cool, pretty well done in all of these. Sure, there's always room for improvements, but the whole point of this one is that if you implement something for your customer, if like customer is like, I want to have my latest 5 emails on the front page of my portal, so I need to have that functionality, which is a typical request. Personally, I don't understand why, but if customer wants, you can come to the SharePoint starter kit, you can pull down the code, you can use the code and repackage that to yourself and deliver that to the customer. That's really the intention of starter kit as well. Give you the capabilities, give you the power, give you the flexibility on reusing the code and open source code. And obviously you can contribute back as well. Where can I find docs on using PnP Graph to access user info? There was a pretty recent blog post from Sergey Sergeyev related on the graph usage with PnP Graph. To be fair, I would first recommend using the native graph and the Fluent Graph APIs. So the PnP Graph is an option, absolutely, that provides a Fluent API on top of the graph calls. Paolo, if you don't mind still going back on the code if you have it open. So the native graph SDK. Sure. Yes, we're gonna take a few more minutes. That's a good question though. The native graph SDK looks like this. You have an API as users and select ID display, blah, 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 blah. The PnP Graph is more fluent. It's more strongly typed implementation. So yes, it's a matter of preference how to make this happen. Good, and thank you, Gautam, for that is actually, yes, that is the right blog post. Excellent. Cool. I think that's it for this one. We're 1 minute on top of the hour. but I think it's fine answering more questions. We're trying to make sure that every single time in these community calls, we will have 5 to 10 minutes time for the Q&A in the end, because there's a lot of questions what people want to ask, and we're more than happy to help with the questions, but we need to just have a time for the questions as well, because it's not like you need to go to the Ignite to have a question for engineering. That's not how it should be. But for this one, next SharePoint Framework JavaScript meeting is on September 27th. That is the Ignite week. So I know that, for example, Patrick unfortunately isn't in Ignite, so Patrick's going to host the call still. So those people who are in Ignite, they will be probably in Ignite. Those who are not can join the call on that side. And the next general SharePoint Dev SIG is on next Thursday. Recording will be available again in 24 hours. We won't be feeding stuff live from Ignite, but I will definitely do some interviews and other stuff in Ignite with my teammates, and we should have good stuff and good coverage from Ignite as well. But thank you everybody for joining. Thank you for your input. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you, Luis, for the great demo. Thank you, Paolo, for the great demo. We have still one more community call before the Ignite next week, and let's see what goodies we can actually show in there. But thank you everybody, and keep the feedback coming. Thank you. Bye-bye.